A field with an oak tree ambiguously found in both time and place. Here, a happy family of craftsman bird creatures live together who are commissioned by a group of aristocratic mice to build for them a doll in the form of a woman whose picture they bring to them. A doll which, in the process of making, they fall in love with, and it becomes the center of their lives, putting flowers in her eyes and swaddling her, before the mice return in the night to take their purchase away with them, leaving the bird people empty and alone, who, in their sorrows, decides that they have to pack up and go out on the road to fulfill a quest to retake their creation back for themselves. It is a strange adventure, one of magical frogs, of dreams, of landscapes vast and barren and filled with mystery. A cake that spills bugs once a slice is cut from it. The music that overplays is one of nostalgic memories of childhood dreams, and the visuals that we are given are a nightmare reflection of those dreams within dreams. Blood Tea and Red String is a world that is both equally rotten and whimsical. The marriage of the iconography of childhood innocence that dances with the presence of everyday evil.
Fluent in many artistic mediums, I'm primarily focused on stop-motion animation, which encompasses a wide range of expression through a variety of materials and techniques to create a compelling, moving image. The tactile intimacy of making puppet-based stop-motion animation enchants me. The clay and fibers, the wire and glue, making with my hands all that I imagine to exist in a self-created world brought to life frame by frame. The heart of my work lies somewhere between fable and fever dream, where anthropomorphic creatures follow their own illogically logical pursuits, and mysterious actions have dire consequences. Characters who live through my art come to me in unguarded moments, finding their way into sketches and journal writings. Those who can speak for the silent parts of my experience come back again and again to stand as symbols encoding my personal history, drawing the thread of a story into the tangled interior forest. All of my artwork contains some level of autobiographical content masked by the invented reality. I'm creating a personal myth using signs and symbols, both deeply personal and anchored in our cultural collective imagination. In creating my individual mythic landscape, I follow dream logic and flashes of inspiration along with themes influenced by my research into the mythology of cultures worldwide, the archetypes of Jungian psychology, and the pre-grim versions of our familiar fairy tales.
Christian Sagowski is a fascinating artist to me for a number of reasons. The first of which is her very clear hold on her gothic personal style. Also the fact that next to no information exists on her online outside of just a handful of interviews that have been conducted over the past 20 years. As well as the idea that all of her projects are done entirely alone in her home. Thousands upon thousands of individually posed and crafted 16mm photographs, dozens of puppets, as well as handcrafted outfits for those puppets. Sets, paintings, effects, all done in her garage by herself. Untold hours dedicated to moving stuffed cloth and clay a couple centimeters at a time, just in order to tell this one story. The process would end up taking her 13 years to complete.
I don't really know how it took 13 years. Most people aren't crazy enough to attempt such a long project without funding and a crew. The high-budget animated films get done a lot quicker, of course. It was my primary focus, but I've always got other projects going. I continue to paint and write and sew. Side projects can invigorate a primary project. By letting your mind wander to less overwhelming work, solutions to previously insurmountable trouble can suddenly appear. The thing that really slowed this project down was earning a living. It can really be a challenge to produce artwork after you're exhausted from working all week.
She said that in between working a day job and raising her kid and just the general toils expected of living a life, as well as other side projects, that things just sort of got away from her.
I think if I condense the time actually spent working on Blood Tea and Red String, it would come out to about 5 years. Oh, how I wish I had the kind of support that would make that kind of timeline possible for Seed in the Sand.
Seed in the Sand being her current film that she again is animating completely by herself, which we will get to momentarily. I know it is a phrase that gets tossed around a lot, a cartoonish amount really, and generally is inappropriately applied. But truthfully, Blood Tea and Red String is one of those films, as is all of her work, where every new shot that she gives you is such a striking image that every frame truly is a painting. Every image that she produces is interesting in its own right. As a film, similarly to works such as Paper House or Coraline, it presents a world familiar to us through its connection to tactile memories of childhood intermingled with the illustrations and written imagery of childhood fairy tales, but presented to us as adults through a horror lens, a John Tenniel drawing brought to life and contorted just ever so slightly. Often on social media, people will start some discourse about if a certain movie is actually horror or not, and I could see this being one of those works that people would get annoying over, with its refusal to be placed in a box of particular genre descriptors. Do you remember that whole thing where people were mad at the idea of cozy horror films not being a thing? Well, if that ever happens again, you can point them in the direction of this, because everything about it is awash in tones of sensations that only live in our mind's view of the past. In a way, Blood Tea and Red String is unlike most works of art that have ever been made, and defies conventional methods of definition. And that is what makes it worthwhile as art. It is what makes it engaging. It is closest to the 1988 masterpiece, Alice, but even this has some significant ways that it departs from what that work did, and any comparisons I think truly only serve critically on a surface level. This is less overtly horrific and nasty in general, or should I say grim. It is gothic, but is less concerned with an overbearing sense of maliciousness in the world. Evil exists here, as presented in beings that are obsessed with money and vices, who are compelled by coveting what others have and have made. But so does good, in the communal living of these artists who create when and what they want to, and spend their days in the sun enjoying the company of each other. There is love, and there is desire, and in that, there is not one that has more power than the other. There is a balance to everything, as seen even in the faces of the flowers, and this general personification of nature, that does not only comment on us but the very idea of nature itself. I could live in the world of Blood Tea and Red String, but I would not want to live in the world of Alice. That one, like Carol's original novel, is steeped in the concept that the world is an overwhelmingly terrifying place, where the constant threat of physical and sexual violence can be found every day, and where strangers should never be trusted under any circumstances. It is an overall paranoid work, whereas this one, to me at least, is largely about the joy that an artist can feel in the process of creation, where the doll that they have made becomes pregnant due to an egg that they have placed inside of her, and their creation gives birth and takes on new forms of life. A clear statement, I think, about art taking on a shape and essence of its own, well after it has left our hands and entered those of its audience. Words and ideas change their meanings and impacts on a personal level once they have left the speaker and are considered by the listener. There is not a single line of dialogue spoken in the entire film, unless you count the inflection of the different noises that the anthropomorphized animals make. And outside of the opening title card, there's not any instances of text provided either. It is an entirely silent experience outside of the music and diegetic sound of the world around these characters. And this was done both for the particular otherworldly mood that it provides for the work, enforcing all of the information to be delivered visually, but also so that the film could be screened at festivals all around the world, and be enjoyed by literally anyone who watched it. The animation tells the story, and without being distracted by subtitles, you can really luxuriate in the small details of what she's crafted for us. In 2006, the movie was a very successful hit on the festival circuit. Variety said of her work, 13 years in the making, Christian Sagowski's very handmade stop-motion feature, Blood Tea and Red String, is an enigmatic, dialogue-free fairy tale few will think suitable for children, though it's close in macabre spirit to the original versions of many classic fables, suggesting a David Lynchian fever dream on Beatrix Potter terrain. Often grotesque, though never in the sick and twisted juvenile gross-out mode, dreamlike feature is as lovingly crafted as it is unsettlingly sour-sweet, with Mark Groudon's avant-garde folk score in perfect sync. The New York Times said, "A wordless stop-motion animated feature shot on 16mm film, wondrously obsolete, as much a work of sculpture as of cinema. Old-fashioned as it is, this dark fairy tale is perfectly au courant, seamlessly in step, in its herky-jerky way, with the artisanal ethos, moody nostalgia, and vogue for gothic motifs, skulls, taxidermy, rampant on the gallery scene." And yet, despite the acclaim of her film, and the widespread recognition of its merits as a work of art from some of the most prestigious publications of its time, and the talent that she clearly has, she still works in relative obscurity. She only has 1,000 followers on Twitter and 15,000 on Instagram, and she still to this day is seemingly struggling financially to finish her passions and projects.
I wish I had a good PR person. I'm really not good at promotion. I make announcements on my Facebook fan pages and using my email list. I agree to do interviews such as this one.
When reflecting on what she has said of her childhood, we can see how her lived experience would later inform the directions that her art would take her. Themes that began then with her life, which followed through in her art. On her faculty biography page for her day job as a professor of animation at the Kansas City Art Institute, it says on her upbringing, Christian Sagowski grew up among the dark firs and gnarly oaks of Oregon. The woodland environment left a permanent mark upon her creative work, in which her anthropomorphic creatures live out their dreams in natural settings. Sagowski's work blurs the boundaries between fine art and imagination, and her gallery art supports and enhances her films, using dreamlike motifs in different mediums. Her finely crafted stop-motion animation is comparable only to a handful of creators, in its expressiveness and artistic quality.
I've been making dolls, puppets, costumes, and stories since I was very small. I learned to sew with the help of my mother and grandmothers, and spent a lot of time with my father helping him make things in the garage. I've made dolls and puppets since I was tiny. The very first doll I remember making was a little Virgin Mary out of my mother's sewing scraps when I was 5. That was soon followed by Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch. Since my mother and grandmother sewed, it seemed like a natural thing to do. I just took it in a different direction from them. My parents provided me with plenty of craft materials, and I spent my free time making dolls, doll clothes, doll houses, doll food, and other items. I was also encouraged to draw and make stories.
By 5th grade, she had already made her first animated short. At 17, she was among the youngest to ever be admitted to the San Francisco Art Institute, where she would study painting before dedicating herself to her love for animation, producing a short titled Blood and Sunflowers while in college that would act as a precursor to her work on Blood Tea and Red Strings, expressing a similar mentality that Lynch had in the era when he made Eraserhead and his short works, that he saw as an extension to his period in art school as a fine artist painter, that film was merely a way to convey visuals, and in effect, a method of making paintings live. Something that is even more evident in her most recent work that is still in production, Seed in the Sand, the proposed second film in a trilogy that makes up this strange fairy tale universe that takes what she did in that film and pushes the boundaries of it to a further level of mastery. Every single detail in her work on this project is pristine. What few clips that she's shared on her YouTube channel demonstrate a level of artistry that you would be impressed by if it were to come from an entire studio of workers, and wasn't just the labor of a single dedicated person working alone in her home. She has even gone so far as to invent new technology to hand animate stop-motion sand, to create a sequence where they find a desert that has waves like the ocean. She began early storyboards for this project in 2003, and then started animating it by herself in that same garage in 2008, using the same process that she had made her first feature with. She said in 2016 that she hoped to finish the film by 2022. This single, fairly simple shot took her a 9-hour day to animate, and that isn't considering the time taken to design and then build the sets and puppets themselves.
2022, hopefully. Yeah, 2022, if we're all still here in the world. And the third film, it's anybody's guess.
The last public update on the film's blog was in 2019, where she posted about finishing a puppet that was skinned entirely in hand-sewn sequins, although she does continue to post behind-the-scenes animation shots on Instagram. It clearly is a beautiful film that I can't wait to one day see, and I would hope that after she is able to more easily create any project that she would like to pursue, I would feel privileged getting to see anything that she's created.
I've just finished a script for a live-action film I'd like to make. There will, of course, be a little animation in it. My next step is to do a few storyboards and prepare a pitch for it so I can start to search for financial support. I really hope to find a way to make this film. Since it's live action, it'll require a team to make it. That's a little different than toiling away alone in a garage for years, so I can't just dive in without help.
This was said 13 years ago now, and the film so far has yet to be made. I can find no other reference to it online. Stop Motion is a film by Robert Morgan, who you may know as the filmmaker behind The Cat with Hands, that many are already saying is going to be the best horror film of 2024, or at least among the best, which is something that I would agree with. It is a complicated film about identity, art, the process of creation, generational trauma, success, time, and how all of those ideas are at constant odds against each other. something that is shown from the very first shot of the film, with its uncanny flashes of expression, emotion, and identity in the changing club lights. It tells the story of Ella, a woman whose mother, Suzanne, is a famous stop-motion filmmaker who can no longer work or even use her hands due to progressed arthritis. And Ella has moved back into her mother's home to help her finish her last film. Ella is a filmmaker herself, but not one who has received the renowned reception that her mother has. And working on this project weighs on her, both because of the amount of time that it is taking from her own eventual career as an artist, mixed with the abusive ways that her mother treats her, who has grown bitter in this late stage of her life because of the cards that she's been dealt. When Ella protests her treatment, all her mother says in return is, "All I want is to finish this film before I die. Is that such a burden?" They are a mirror image of each other, made clear from this shot when they are eating dinner together. Even the painting on the wall is symmetrical. The only difference in the reflection is that one is young and the other old. Ella stares at who she will one day become. The film itself that they are making together is representative of the amount of time required to produce art, meeting the realities and limitations of the human body. The story is about a woman Cyclops, who practices a very difficult craft, who trades one of her eyes to the gods in order to see her own destiny, only to be cursed with the knowledge of her death. It isn't long after we meet the two that Suzanne dies, unexpectedly, and Ella spirals into being lost in a depression. She throws out the work of her mother's film, destroys all of her old props and puppets, and begins to finally work on her own project in a studio apartment that she rents, where she befriends a young girl who lives in the complex, who is interested in the animation process, who soon takes her place that she once took in her mother's creative life, just as she now takes the place of her mother. Time causes these transitions within life, and yet this art that they make proceeds at an agonizing pace through those transitions. "It must take ages," the little girl says when they first meet. "It does," Ella returns. "Then why bother?" "Well, because I like it, because I'm good at it, and because it feels like you're bringing something to life." Animation to her becomes a method not only to mold and control life in ways that cannot ever really be done, but also to mentally contextualize events happening around her that she does not want to reckon with. And in bringing her work to life, her art becomes clinically obsessed with death. Her new film tells the story of a girl who has lost her way in the wood, who is hiding from the man that nobody wants to meet, but everyone does eventually meet, psychologically mirroring her inability to process her own mother's death, while also displaying her need and desire to no longer be her puppet and be in command of her own story. And this is in part the demonstration of her slow decline both physically and mentally, in these somewhat ambiguous days, weeks, or even months after her mother passes. In the first scenes, she is pretty, thoughtful, well put together, and kind, only for her to slowly become dirt-covered, mentally unwell, quick to anger, violent, and almost always exclusively dressed in baggy old clothes, as we watch her become obsessed with telling the story of this little girl and this man deep in the woods. The figure of the girl herself is even made from the same wax the morticians used to smooth the skin of the faces of the dead for presentation. If this metaphor was not clear enough, the filmmakers have her boyfriend disrupt our view of the puppet with a slab of darkened raw beef. She gets an idea soon after, and decides that meat would make a much more excellent material to craft new animation puppets from. Starting with beef and then moving on to other dead things that she finds in the woods, until she eventually crafts fresh ones from the bodies of her loved ones that she kills for her art. An extension of her desire to exert control over the world, instead of being forced to confront the chaos of existence. She is someone who cannot handle the realities of life and it breaks her. And instead of being able to accept these things, she can only view them in abstract ways through art and creation. As shown through what I think is the most disturbing scene in the film, where she reanimates her mother and, in a way, brings her back to life, by making a stop-motion film of her dead hands, by taking pictures of them one at a time on her cell phone. We are given a metaphor about how all art is a combination of the memories of things around us and our past, a meditation on the theme that great artists always put themselves into their own work, eventually even literally doing so, by pulling meat for her puppets out of the vaginal wound in her leg, to give birth to a new thing that can have meaning for those who experience it. Ultimately, Ella is someone who cannot be confronted by time. She cannot accept time. And stop motion as a medium of art is one that is both defined by and obsessed with the concept of the time that it takes to create it. In the home of the rich mice and blood tea and red string, they pass time by playing cards, drinking tea, filling their days with leisure and empty relaxation. But these scenes are not peaceful. The clock on the wall clicks faster and faster. Its rhythm fills the scene with an ever-quickening pace of dread as the clock ticks, 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 ticks. We can't wait to get out of this room, to be away from that awful clock and its reminder that everything is fleeting. Its presence so dominating that we can't even bring ourselves to focus on anything else happening in the sequence. The cards are blank. Their game has no meaning or outcome that even really matters. The clock is framed in the background of a great deal of shots, and over their shoulders a black raven looms with a human skull for a head. These mice get into a blood-drunk dispute over this game that clearly doesn't matter, and an altercation results from that which ends with them rolling on the floor, that somehow turns into a climax of life. Music, dance, sexual contact, and mixed emotions, all while the deathbird looms and simply watches. We sit in that moment for 4 minutes out of the roughly hour-long film, and I think if there's a single word that could be said to be the primary meditation of Blood Tea and Red String, it would be time. The most impactful cut in the editing of the film for me comes at the end of the sequence, when the first shot of the next scene is the body of a dead bird.
I break up the work into manageable pieces in a long-term production schedule with solid goals dispersed along the way. Finish a puppet, build a set, complete a scene, each is a small triumph. Opportunities to show my work in progress are also very rewarding and motivational. When my audience gives me a positive response and expresses a desire to see more, it spurs me on.
I understand that this is all in actuality quite different from what I do. But for me, I have always kind of seen In Praise of Shadows in this kind of way. A long work of personal writing and creating that is as much a part of me as I am it. Each video that I make is merely a reflection of who I am in that moment and the things that are on my mind. It is something that I work on every single day. And while I have the luxury of doing different projects within the larger project, which is the channel itself, to me, it is all one part of a long work that I've been doing since 2018, that I plan to continue to do for a very long time, if I am so lucky. I've even talked about these kinds of things before, most notably with Strangehaven and The Evil Within, and they've always been to me one of the most unique forms of art that a person could make. A singular work that spans their life, or a great deal of it, which is why I've decided to do a short series of 4 or maybe 5 videos, beginning with this one that you're watching, focusing on these kinds of projects. Ones that were born out of passions, but for one reason or another took years or decades before an audience could see them completed. So please, join me over the next few weeks as we look at the history of some of the genre films that have taken the longest for their creators to produce, and we'll talk about what that means for them as artists and us as audiences. If you'd like to help me with this, you can always support me on Patreon, and I'll see you again very soon.
Life is a precious thing that we don't know the value of. But you will find when your heart learns to sing, life is the thing you love. There at your fingertips lies the answer to all your dreams. Someone's caresses and somebody's lips teach you how much life means. Wait till you fall